6. Calgary beat Ryerson. Mitch Wood hits a 3. Coached by Scott Morrison by 50. Layton off the block, just put it right back up. Witness during these tournaments.
Okay, well, I'd like to welcome everyone tonight to our second session of the Ontario Education Summit. We're very pleased to have from Alberta, Perry Stothart with us tonight. Just a little bit about Perry. Perry has been a FIBA official for a number of years now, since 2004. He's worked many tournaments at that level, including a pair of Universiads, as well as the World U19 Championships that he's worked. Perry is also in training to become a FIBA commissioner as well. The current president of the Alberta Basketball Officials Association, and he's also a current CEBL as well as USport official. Perry's worked a number of tournaments at the USport level nationally, garnering lots of attention there as well. By trade, Perry does landscaping. With that, he also has a radio show that runs out west during the summer. He does on TSN with his horticulturing business. I think that's it. Eh? Pretty busy guy for having time to join us. So, Perry, welcome to Ontario. Thank you for taking the time to do this. We truly appreciate you coming out and speaking to us this evening. So, the floor is yours.
Great. Well, thanks, Dan. I'll share my screen here in a second. I did want to thank Dan and everybody for the opportunity. I'm excited to spend some time with you. I'm sure we'd all rather be on the floor, but the opportunity to spend some time here tonight, and hopefully I'll be able to share some thoughts with you that resonate in a way that can be impactful for you. And I'm going to kick it in here, and so I'm going to share my screen, and then we'll start talking. And I'll share a few thoughts with you in the beginning, and then kind of get it rolling here. But
Perry, real quickly, I'm just going to mute everyone, which will mute you as well, and you'll just have to unmute yourself.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so you can see me all right there, Dan? The screen's good? Okay. So, a couple of things I wanted to share today. Obviously, the title of my talk today, or the time I'm going to spend with you, is What's Your Brand? The thought I had sort of through this, and the narrative I wanted to run kind of as the idea of officials having a brand, what we put out there, what we project. It can be image. We're going to talk a little bit about some of those things. And the idea that perhaps what we think our brand isn't the brand we're putting out there. And so I'm just going to use that as sort of a loose narrative kind of running through the presentation today, with the idea that, I can share some thoughts related to that, and hopefully just keep everything and build it together. Sort of along with that, I wanted to maybe share some things. A lot of you on the call, we were sort of chatting to begin with, are friends, and I mean that sincerely. We've refed together. We've shared time together. Personally, everything I'm going to share with you today is based on a few things. One is, I'm a pretty optimistic person at heart, and I don't have a lot of desire or time for crazy negativity. And so while I do enjoy being challenged, and I'm an extremely competitive person, I do so always with an optimistic sort of slant to the thoughts I'm going to share. And so if you're not quite sure what I'm thinking, start in an optimistic, positive place, and you'll probably be on a similar path to what I'm trying to share with you, if that makes sense. And so, along with that, personally, I like to smile. I do it a lot. I find that, the connections we make officiating are pretty awesome. And at the end of the day, it's all worth it. I think it's great that we're going to be, here in this room together. And so again, I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to, get you thinking, maybe try and shift your perspectives a little bit, is sort of my intent tonight. But again, I'm going to do all of that with a smile on my face, and hopefully that is a delivery method that's going to work for everybody. And, I really do think, obviously we bring a lot to the table. We have a lot of different, personalities, a lot of different skills, all these kinds of things. But I think at a very basic level, we're more alike than we are different. And I think that even when somebody might seem to have a completely, opposing perspective, The fact is, it's only a slight shift in our thinking that really can align us in more positive ways, and probably a lot quicker than most of us would anticipate. And so I think that's sort of some of the vibe that I want to get going through this presentation. So, along those lines, I have it subtitled "Marketing is Easy When You Build the Best Product." Kind of the thought of, if you're going out there as a salesperson, and I don't mean this to be facetious, but at a level we have to, present in a way that is a positive sort of image, whatever you want to call it. And so when you can work on the product, meaning yourself, and really have the best product, I feel like it's easier to be that. We're all unfinished products. I mean, I've been refereeing a long time. As Dan mentioned, I think a lot of us have. But whether you have or haven't been refereeing for many years, if you didn't feel like on every given day, every time you stepped on the floor, you had something to learn and something to gain and something to improve, I would have, stepped away a long time ago. I still feel that. I mean that very sincerely. I was joking with Dan earlier, and I know we start off presentations like this by reading people's CVs, and I think that's important on a level. But I'm going to ask you the first question, and is like, does my CV matter? Like, are you more open or less open to what you're going to hear from me because of your perception of what I might be as an official, or even as a person for that matter? I think at the end of the day, you're going to do yourself a disservice if you have some of those prejudgments coming in. I hope I'm engaging. I hope you get something out of this. But frankly, we have something to learn and something to gain from each other, whether it's a new official. I can learn things from a rookie official, how they perceive things, what they're learning, what they're thinking. And I would suggest that we all can. And so I encourage you always, whether it's myself presenting or anybody else in this environment, or frankly in a local board setting, that we really pay attention and open ourselves to the insights that might come before us. Frankly, one of the things that I always get out of these is that, I tend to be inspired in ways that don't necessarily have a lot to do with the words or the exact content that's coming out of somebody's mouth. But, you start to get thinking and maybe about your own situations and things like that. And so those are things that can be positive as well. And so along with that, I've kind of given it another subtitle, a little Borat reference. And, it's interesting to me because Max, presented last week. Max volunteered to go first. I wanted to slide in earlier in the year because, as Dan mentioned, as the horticulturist, our season's kind of snapping a little bit here and starting to get busier. I feel like this, goes really hand in hand well with sort of on the piggyback of what Max started last week, even though we all sort of got to choose our own subjects. So that was something that was, I think, good. So the thought I have as well is, I always, whenever I'm part of these seminars, whether it's basketball related, work related, whatever, I know we've all spent a lot of time on Zoom. I kind of sort of categorize things in my mind, and it doesn't matter if I'm in a basketball seminar or if I'm in a work seminar. Things I can apply in my personal and family life, things I can apply in my work or business life, or things I can apply in refereeing. I might be reading an article on the art of negotiation as a business article or a business thing, where I might actually, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later in some slides. It has nothing to do with basketball, but I think a lot of the themes and principles overlap. And so I'll use that kind of stuff. I'll put pen to paper. I'll say, hey, this would be a great thing to cover in a pregame, even though it might not be a, hey, where are you going to look when the ball is here kind of stuff, even though that's also important. And so I encourage you to sort of maybe take that, tone or idea as well. So we're in a performance-based avocation, and I think that that's pretty straightforward. We, compared to ourselves, compared to others. What I mean by that is, personal sort of development, evaluators, assigners, teammates in terms of referee crews, they see development in a person. So we're going to compare ourselves. Has he shown improvement? Is she improving? Is she plateauing? Is she, reducing? Those kinds of things. So that kind of idea. And of course, we're being compared to others. I think a lot of times as referees, we really focus on so-and-so's getting the games, so-and-so's not getting the games, those kinds of things, and what that might mean. Frankly, I think there's a lot of things we do and choices we make that drive off success. And I'm going to talk about that today in terms of just, getting our headspace in a way that allows us to perceive things that are going to be more positive. allow us to perform at a higher level. Subjectivity, and that's a big one. And I sort of alluded to it. I talked about, the idea that somebody else's opinion of us matters, and it does at a level. And sometimes that's difficult because, she just doesn't like me, or they don't respect what I'm doing, or all these kinds of things that we can go down a dark road. And we've all, sort of wondered about, hey, I feel like I'm doing everything I can. That's maybe up for debate always. But the one thing about subjectivity is it really is, framed in within the power of perspective. And the advantage in that is it is totally within our control and can be changed and reformatted really quickly. Again, but for a few degrees shift in a perspective, something that you would consider subjective can really be altered in a more positive way. And so I'm going to talk about some of the, things I use personally and how I think, and want to encourage others to try and think in a way that's going to allow you to, for lack of a better description, twist things to your benefit. Because I do think that sometimes we really allow ourselves to, walk off and, off the positive pathway in terms of development. And really what we're talking about is elite performance. Presence is a word that we use a lot as officials. Presence, the noun has a couple meanings. I'm going to talk about them both. Presence, obviously, when we talk about image, the line I have here is that we're judged by outward expressions of our inner commitment. The thinking about, well, if that person does this, they're obviously committed. The fact is we don't know how committed somebody is. But we don't really have a way to judge those things other than outward expressions. And so they're important. What we put out there, our brand, if you will, matters because it does show commitment and things you can do that change your brand, change your image, presence, all the things we talk about in officials, looking confident. You might not be confident in every moment, but faking it till you make it. We've all heard those kinds of terms. That falls into that definition of presence. The other one, I'm going to talk about is presence actually being here. You're present in this webinar. I'm going to suggest that, the Ciprianis of the world, the Mike Falloons of the world, your signers, whoever they might be, without putting them on the spot, I'm going to say they probably had a look through who's on this call today. They want to see who's here, who's putting in the time, who's seeming engaged. Now, whether or not you have parts of your life that don't allow you to be on this call, you may not. I mean, we can't all be here. But the fact is your presence is noted. People note that. And it's not just presences and poise, but it's presences in actually being there. And so I think those are really important things to understand as well. So talking about in the present, if you ever participated in any kind of sports psychology, elite performance, they often talk about, the highest level of performance can be achieved, meaning you perform your best when you can keep your mind in the present. I think this was highlighted a little bit when Max last week talked about the picture he shared with him and Matt Boyle, how, something was grating on Matt and he was sort of focusing on it and they had a nice talk, and as a crewmate, they were able to, sort of get, Matt through it, right? And that works a lot for us, right? We think about, maybe you blew a call or it's somebody just grating on you, or there's, crew dynamics that aren't working, and you allow those thoughts to take you away from being in the present. You're thinking about previous calls, you're thinking about what's coming next. You're missing and not dedicating the focus to the play that's right in front of you. There's a sports psychologist, happens to be centered here in Edmonton, that works a lot with professional athletes. His name's John Stevenson. And Braden Holtby is one of his main students, if you will, pupils. I don't know if you've ever seen in a hockey game where, and Holtby does this, and having known John, I recognize it, but they kind of squirt the water bottle into the air, right? Maybe a goal goes in, you see goalies lean on the net, and a lot of times they just squirt water into the air before they take a drink. And I always thought, that was just whatever, a tick or something. But actually the fact is it's a mental technique. They focus on the water shooting out of the bottle as a way to get you in the here and now. And again, having mental techniques, that's not what this is going to be about today, but just the idea that if we put ourselves in the present, we're focusing on the right things, especially within the context of a basketball game. And so as referees, if you can find something that allows you to come back into the present, you might find yourself snapping out of that fog and that concern over, again, the missed call and all these things that bring you back, to the now. And I think those are, that's sort of an important thought in terms of that as well. And the thing about when you're setting up, the thoughts of improving yourself or, development or however you want to word it, you got to start with the why. The power of vision, passion, if you want to use that word. Like, why do you want to do this? Some people, they have a goal. They might have a very specific goal, and that's great. I think we need to have goals. Max, again, touched on that. That's always very important. But, maybe you just want to get out. Maybe you want to give back to the community. Maybe you do have a goal of reffing at very elite levels. But again, start with that. If you're not sure why you want to do it, I think it's very difficult to put in the kind of commitment it's going to take. And when I say that, I don't mean the kind of commitment it's going to take to become an international referee or to work in the NBA. But I mean, even just at a base level, to enjoy participating in community games or, local, JV or high school games or whatever they might be. And so again, start with the why. I think that is really important, sort of first step. Then what? When I talk about the what, I have fitness here, your image, maybe athleticism is another really good word to represent fitness. I have a Dr. Seuss quote here. You're in pretty good shape for the shape you're in. I think any presentation is made better if it can have a Dr. Seuss quote in it. So I enjoy that aspect of it. But the thought that we can control that, the idea of fitness, image, how you present yourself, again, shows inner commitment. I'll use the example of somebody that's maybe carrying a few extra pounds. Maybe you've been talked about. Maybe they say, hey, listen, at this level, we need you to be in better shape. Maybe you want to consider that. I'm going to tell you that I think in a very real way, if you're somebody that is carrying some extra weight, and I realize that it takes commitment to shed those pounds to improve on, again, your perceived fitness. If you do that and you come back the next season over the summer when people haven't seen you for a few months and you've dropped 20 pounds, you actually gain more almost than somebody that maintained through the whole thing, because people go, well, look, holy cow, they put in the work. Look at what they did. That must be important to them, and there can be all kinds of reasons for making that kind of decision. But, when we talk about it, it does make a difference. Okay. People notice, if you're looking to get to the next level, the assigners maybe at a certain level make those decisions. Again, you might have, conference supervisors and things like this when we talk about the college and university levels, CEBL, whatever, they're in the business of identifying talent, okay? They're not out there looking at games and talking to people and looking at referees for no reason. They want the next star. They want the next person that's showing potential. That's what they want. And so if we can give it to them, that's a goal that we're going to enjoy realizing, if that is in fact our goal. One thing I've always found about, moving from one level to the next, meaning, you do maybe start at some junior high or community games, whatever, club team games, and then you get some high school games, and then the better high school games, college, university. When you move to that next perceived level, the next level up, you're instantly a much better official at the level that you came from. So the first time I reffed a college game, the next week when I walked in that high school gym, it was, they know you from the college. You start to get used to the pace of those faster games. And when you come back to that, everything sort of slows down. And again, with elite performance, you can slow down the games you're going to feel like is something that, again, is more impactful in terms of your development. The how. I talked about this, and this is the quote that I got from what I referenced earlier, that article about negotiation. So this specifically is talking about negotiation. The more knowledgeable and prepared you are, the better outcomes you'll create. There is a direct relationship between your preparation and the results you achieve. I believe that completely. And I found that to be the case. A lot of times you might say, well, it doesn't matter what I do, so-and-so is holding me back. And in circumstances as an acute sort of thing, that might be the case. But if you're truly committed, if you're a performer, if you're growing, there will be opportunities. And I'm going to say that how things were, even 15 years ago or 10 years ago is dramatically different. Continues to change. We're looking to identify people quicker and younger. There is opportunities, and that's just a fact. That's the fact of how the environment of refereeing and officiating is shifting. and we talk about covering the basics. And I'm going to put rules and mechanics on here. It always seems sort of a glossed over blasé kind of thing. It's maybe an easy thing to cover the basics in terms of rules and mechanics. I used to always hear, or was a general thing, a common thing. And when I say common, I'm going to say in my experience. And, as a matter of principle, I happen to like my opinion, so I get to share it with you here tonight. But, the idea that, hey, we can all call the balls and strikes, so we're not going to talk about judgment, and we'll focus on some other things. Well, I'm going to tell you that's not true, okay? It's not automatic that you can look at a play and just people will mostly get it right. If they don't know what to look for, if they're not in the proper position, these kinds of things, that can all be the case where they are in the proper position. They know what they're supposed to be looking at. They are looking in the right direction, and they still get it wrong. And so we have to be willing to accept feedback on judgment. But moving on to rules and mechanics, there's some very basic things that you need to and are important to cover. I'm going to say these are things that you can work on your own. The most important conversations we're ever going to have are with the ones in the mirror. Okay. And if we know that we've prepared properly, we put in the time, that rules exam where they give you a month, that exam window is not so, terrifying. And then the other things I'm going to kind of wrap up together are attitude and an expression of desire. And so when I talk about attitude, I think it's pretty straightforward. Negative attitudes can really burn things down, and they're not going to help us. They're not going to help us as people and building relationships with people. They're not going to help us perform in terms of the games we might get, or working or developing these relationships, not only with coaches and players, spectators, whatever, but obviously our teammates as other officials as well. And I think that's really important. I think about an expression of desire. I'm kind of reminded that if people don't know you want it, or if they know you want it, then they might help you get there in certain ways, or they're like, okay, this is the first step to getting to that goal. I think back to back in like 20 years ago, like 99, I think, there was a summer Western Canadian Games, and they were in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. And then I got to referee a couple weeks later at the Nationals, which the Juvenile Nationals, U17 Nationals, were in Vancouver. Bill Crowley happened to be the assigner. It was my first year. I just finished my first year refereeing university basketball. Bill didn't really know me, knew of me, and so he happened to be there. And then there was this gentleman named Tim Heenan, who is originally from California. I was living in Victoria, so he was helping Bill out as an assigner. And Bill, Tim, after one of the games, I was used to hearing, hey, stand a couple meters off the baseline, you'll be the world's best referee, that kind of stuff. First game I ref in front of Tim, and he walks in and he goes, your eyes shift when you call a foul. And I was like, it was just a different level, like instantly. And then another question he asked me, hey, do you remember that play where so-and-so happened? And I was like, man, I can't remember the one you're talking about. I think evaluators and officials, we've all been there, right? Can't quite remember the play they're talking about, even though maybe it was significant. And he just looked at the other person in the room and he goes, yeah, I used to always remember those plays. And it was like a knife in the heart, right? It was an extremely impactful statement. And so then I personally was like, I'm never going to have that feeling again. So, and to this day, if you want to come in and talk in a post game and start bringing up plays, I'm going to know what you're talking about. But the next level, and where I'm going with expression of desire, is that because of that experience with Tim, I was really impressed with him. So the next year they created the panel in Canada West. I was fortunate because, Bill had seen me that summer and I had sort of 1 year under my belt. I was young, they kept me on. So I told him, I said, hey, if there's any way that, I was young and not traveling at that point. So, hey, any way you can, assign Tim some games in Edmonton or get him close to me so I can watch him work. Because I only knew Tim as an evaluator. I didn't know him as a person or as an official outside of sort of that. And, and that's all. I left it at that. And I said, hey, and I would give my left arm if you would let me work some games with him. But I left it at that. Bill might've been thinking to himself, this guy can't even walk straight. I don't know. He's trying to run a little too soon, but at least I expressed the desire. I think it came out of a good place. I wanted to learn and develop from, sort of expanding on this experience that I had with him. And fortunately enough, that year we got to do a playoff series together, and I got assigned to referee with Tim. And it was just a great experience, a really good experience and opportunity for me as an official to be able to realize that, and so it was interesting. But, to go back to the start of this story, I refereed in the Western Canada Summer Games. I was just the alternate for nationals. I was selected to go to the Western Canadian Games. It was the same teams, but just the Western half. They sort of had the Western Canada Games with a bunch of other sports, and then the basketball teams went on to nationals. The person that was supposed to go to nationals couldn't go. They, for whatever work reason or whatever, couldn't go. And so I still remember getting this phone call from Basketball Alberta. And they said, "Hey, Perry, I know you're the alternate, but because he had to cancel so late, it's going to cost too much to change the name on the ticket. So we're just not going to send anybody from Alberta to nationals." And I was like, "Oh man, that's a bummer." I was young then, and young enough. And then as soon as the phone call was over, I was like, "No, man, like a plane ticket." So I called them right back. I said, "Hey, if we're talking about a plane ticket, I'll pay for my plane ticket. Like, I want to go. Like, I don't want to lose this opportunity." So I got to go. They said, "Oh, really? You'll pay for the," okay, well then sure, I guess you can go. I got there, the pants didn't fit me. The person that was supposed to go was shorter. The jacket didn't quite fit. I didn't care about any of that stuff. I would have never had those experiences with Tim and other things if I didn't express that desire, put myself out there, take some responsibility for what I perceived as a really good opportunity. Now, we're not always going to have those opportunities, but it just goes to show if you express the desire, it's the very first step to moving on to that path. And I know that I never thought about being a FIBA official. I still remember it in the early 90s. Jake Steinbrenner was a person, a lot of you would know Jake, in Edmonton. They had this registration sheet, filled out, what level of basketball do you want to referee, with your name and address and all this stuff. And it was like college, university. I was like, sure, I'll check that box, check that box. And I was like, FIBA International. I was like, I didn't even know that was a thing. Sure, why not? Check that box. And it seems simple, but it was something that really moved me on to that kind of idea that, this is actually something that could be achieved. Well, now what's the next step? How do I get to that level? If you can handle the pain of discipline, you'll never have to deal with the pain of disappointment. It might seem like an interesting quote, and you're like, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense, Perry, because let's be honest. I mean, sometimes disappointment isn't up to you, and I'm going to tell you it always is up to you, how you respond to situations. When I see this, the thing that comes to mind is the beep test, to be honest with you. And I'd be interested to know, I know you mentioned some of our FIBA compatriots on here, MPs with us and stuff. Those of you that run the beep test regularly, and some of you have done that. There's nothing worse. It's like an exam. There's nothing worse than standing on that starting line with that really scary music playing. I'd be interested to hook up a heart rate monitor to a bunch of FIBA officials, of people that have run the beep test, and see what their heart rate does as soon as that music kicks on. But that's maybe a separate scientific study I'll do. But the point is, if you in that moment and had not prepared, had not tried it before, had never run the beep test, I'm gonna let you in on a secret. I happened once. I was running the beep test, and a person close to me was like, "Hey, so what do we have to do for this thing?" I was like, "Are you serious? Like, you haven't prepared? Like, you haven't tried?" I remember running it, 6, 8, 10 times before the first time I had to do it, because it was the one thing that if you failed, you could not get a FIBA license. I remember having such a bad cold, and it was just a mess, and my lungs hurt, and I was like, well, I got to go run it. Who knows if I'll be like that on the day? It's important. And if you put in the time and the effort, you'll be able to manage what you see as perceived disappointment. We all want to ref the final game. Of course we do. I mean, really it comes out of a fundamental desire for me, especially. I feel like a lot of us would be the same. You just want to ref the best basketball, right? The best teams, the best environment, all those things are why we do it. Extra discipline makes up for a lack of talent, and a lack of discipline quickly siphons away extra talent. That's why it's frequently the most disciplined rather than the most gifted who rise to the top. The winning combination is to combine both of these elements. And I get it. Refereeing in Canada, it is an avocation. It is a lot of times a volunteer thing, it seems, and we do it because we love it. But there are significant opportunities for people here in Canada. And when you can combine sort of this thinking and sort of shift your thinking a bit to really take responsibility and ownership of it, that's one of the beautiful things I find about refereeing, is that, we get to make choices, right? And the next choice is still up to us. And, I enjoy that part of it. It's really important. Okay, so I'm going to talk about critical feedback, and there's a few things I want to get through here. So, I talked about earlier, conversations in the mirror and the idea with critical feedback and being able to take a critical look at your own performances. Sometimes we're going to have other people in the room. Sometimes we might watch video. Video is unreal. And in this day and age, if you're not doing it, you're falling behind. It's a really significant way to learn. I remember a question last week, if I get it right, I believe that somebody asked Max at the end about, what do you look for when you're watching video? I'm going to tell you, it ranges. A lot of times it's position on the call and things like that. I know Max had his answer. I look at how my arms sway in the wind when I walk, Goofy, because I'm sort of a taller, longer arm guy. When we talk about having mentors and examples, when I talk about signals, I have to really work at, keeping my muscles engaged, because if I don't, my arms just kind of look like they're flopping all over the place. And so those are some things I look at. I look too nonchalant as I was walking. It might be that simple. I don't do that every time, but I mean, it's definitely there. And then we move on to positioning, and maybe a call, maybe there was a big call. I track rotations across the baseline. A lot of times, if maybe you've been in this situation, you might get into a game, especially with 3-person, where we're talking about baseline rotations, where somebody says, what, nothing was really coming to me tonight. And you might hear, yeah, well, that was good. You didn't reach out of your primary and try to make something happen. Sometimes you get those nights. But if you check rotations and somebody rotated across the baseline 4 times in a game and their partners rotated 16 and 18 times a game, well, maybe nothing came to you because you weren't taking the opportunities to put yourself in the proper position. It can work both ways. So critical feedback, I'm going to talk about critical, the definition of the word here a little bit. And the first ones I'm going to share with you are sort of a negative definition of critical. And, things like cynical, demeaning, cutting, belittling. I'm going to use these words. Like, the idea with being critical is not meant to criticize somebody, but to take a critical look. And the same synonyms, they mean the same thing, that I'm going to highlight are things like to be analytic, humbling. It's such a good word. I think that can work on both ways. Sometimes you might perceive it as like humbling is, oh man, he was humbled because he really got drilled in that post game. But how much more powerful is it to come in with some humility? And I talked about being open in the beginning, to want to accept that. I like I said, I'm a really competitive person. I like being challenged. So that to me is part of the dynamic. Some people maybe not so much, but at the end of the day, as somebody that evaluates or referees with people, or perhaps is, refereeing and focusing on my own game, humility goes a long way. And I can feel pretty confident in saying that it's unlikely that you will continue to get drilled if humility runs through your being. The yeah buts of the world, I think we've all heard that phrase, they have something to offer, but you say yeah but, or sort of argumentative back. You don't have to agree with everything that somebody shares with you, but you should understand that perspective might be what you're putting out there. You think that your brand, your logo that you put out there is one thing, and really what it is another. In the business world, they do studies, and 80% of businesses say they provide superior customer service. So if you were to ask a business, 80% of them would say superior customer service. You bet we provide it. 8% of consumers agree. So, I mean, who's right? So understand that when people are sharing thoughts with you, listen, you can sort of discount it if you want, but I would just listen to it honestly. I remember, when I was refereeing high school, I got to referee high school provincials, and this would again been, mid 90s. So I was probably university at the time, maybe 22 years old, something like that, 23 years old. And I remember one year I refereed like the 3A girls final. In Alberta, we have 4As, kind of the highest level high school based on the size of the school. I refereed their 3A girls final with an official. We both got to referee the 4A boys next year. He ended up refereeing the 4A boys final the next year, and I was watching on the last day. I didn't have any assignments, and they didn't have enough to go around, but I remember the perception, very distinctly sitting there going, man, I could have been, oh, this person, this evaluator doesn't even know what he's doing. Like, what the heck, man? Like, I'm just as good as this other person. Like, we refereed the final last year together. What's changed in a year? Okay. I mean, and some of you might even think I'd be justified in that feeling. But the other side of that is that that's not going to take me anywhere positive. right? That's giving away control to somebody else. I want the control to be with me where I can enact change. I remember very distinctly sitting in the top row of those bleachers thinking to myself, man, is this how he sees me? I'm not that guy. And so either I'm going to prove him right or I'm going to prove him wrong. And that to me can be a very powerful shift in a mindset, because if you allow that to bog you down, we're going to be disappointed all the time. You might not have any idea about why assignments are done or not. I mean, that's just a fact most of the time. And don't allow that to take you down that dark road, because again, you're going to beat off success with a stick if you focus on that in such a negative way. Vital, another good synonym for critical. To me, I see those as positive words. Being analytic, penetrating, if you will, digging into it, being a little bit more than superficial in feedback with somebody, I think is really important, and willing to accept it is also really important. But the one word that I want to say to me encapsulates feedback that's the most important is honest. Honest feedback. And my willingness to share honest feedback with you says more about what I think of you than it does what I think of your performance. And what I mean by that is, if I don't think that you'll be able to accept it because it'll make you cringe, or you're just going to say, yeah, buts, or whatever, then I'm not willing to be honest with you, or I'm going to make a decision not to be, because I just don't think you can take it. So I'm making a judgment on what I think your fortitude is, what I think your openness is, what I think your ability is. It's had nothing to do with the performance and talking about specific plays. But if I'm willing to be honest with you and you can take it in the right way and accept it, then that says a lot to me about what you're willing to do yourself. And then again, what I think of you versus what I think of your performance. And I think that's something to consider, because we've all been on both ends of really sunshine and rainbows kind of post games, and ones that are a lot more difficult because crew performance just wasn't there. And I think that that can be a good way to really think about it. But again, I'm with you. As people sharing the information as evaluators, it's important that we can be honest and analytical and share the vital information with people, but we have to do so in the proper way as well. I mean, character counts on both ends. And when we can do so and share it with you, I'm going to ask maybe a quick question. If somebody puts their hand up quick, they can answer it for me, or go off mute or whatever. So if I focus on that phrase, my willingness to share honest feedback with you, what word or phrase out of that whole thing jumps out at you? What do you focus on? What stands out? Give me anybody. Dan, you can answer if you want, if you're quick. Anybody that puts their hand up, I want to hear.
I think the important part would be the sharing of that, because I think it's a shared partnership. It's not just one-sided. I think it needs to be both ways.
Good, that's a good one. Okay, I think Hutch was there. Go ahead.
Hey guys, yeah, I would say analytical, like with honesty, but analytical, to give some constructive feedback, how to fix something so that you're not constantly doing something wrong without knowing.
Okay, good. Anything else?
So a few people in the chat, Perry, a few people have said willingness. Another said honest. A couple of things that were just pointed out.
Yeah, and that makes me smile, because I'm going to tell you that I put this question to some others too, and some of what I heard back was what I think of you. People focused on that. They were like, oh, that ends up being the focus, like what I think of you. And to me, the anchor word in that whole statement is willingness. I'm willing to share with you. You mentioned share, but I'm willing. I'm taking the time. Focus on that part of it. Don't focus on the what I think of you. Because honestly, at the end of the day, what I think of you, it may not be factual. I might have my own biases, or whatever it is, but it's not going to impact you unless you allow it to. But that can be positive and negative. So, keep that in mind as well. All right. So we got one more slide, and then we'll wrap up here. So sort of along the ideas of a marketing review. So, what is your Google review? If I was to ask you, what do you think people are going to say about you? What would they say. I've copied down some actual Google reviews that I think could apply to officials. And so, 5-star review. She was attentive and knowledgeable. She is a huge asset. 1 star was a huge letdown in service. They should adjust so they don't create false expectations. Imagine somebody walks in a gym and they look like they're a good referee and athletic and they want to be there, and none of those things come to fruition when the game happens. They almost should just walk in with their hair unkempt and their shirt untucked, because that's how they refereed almost. Answered every question, even the stupid ones. Love that. That should apply to referees. I think that's awesome. A 5-star review. So how many times are we dismissive of people, whether it's coaches, players, whatever, because it's just a stupid question? It took 3 separate inquiries to get an explanation of what happened. These are all actual 5-star and 1-star quote reviews. He's honest and good. I know some of the stuff he did was not in his job description. He's honest and good. Like, what more could you say about somebody that wasn't good? Like, if that's all somebody said about you, that'd be pretty awesome. It was very patronizing. He kept yelling at us to come here and go there. These weren't referee reviews, but I feel like they could be. And so when you think about it, one of the things that really stuck with me, I found really interesting last week with Max's presentations, when he talked about, sort of writing down and mailing it to a friend and having to mail back to him, a few months down the road or whatever it was, in terms of goals and things like that. This exercise, the thought I had was, like, if you were honest with yourself and you wrote your Google review, what would people say about Perry Stothart? And be honest with yourself, right? And if there's things in there that you want to change, if any of these things apply, Perry's pretty patronizing, man. He just talks down to everybody. I think that should cut you to the quick a little bit. And don't do it with rose-colored glasses. Do it like a goal-setting thing. This is what I think my honest Google review is right now, and this is what I'd like it to be. I mean, I think that might be something to consider in terms of, a goal, or maybe a different way to look at things and think about what we're putting out there, how we're perceived by others. And don't astroturf it. And astroturfing is that idea that you just give yourself good reviews all the time. That's not going to be helpful. But be honest with yourself. Give it, a real, again, honest look at what we want. Like, what do we perceive is our image of the best official? And we might have different things in our head. And so maybe I'll leave you with this. If you were to picture in your mind the perfect picture of a basketball referee, so actively engaged as a basketball referee, what is it? Do you in your mind see a basketball referee that's pointing at somebody, teed up a coach, and their mid-technical foul signal? Is it nose to nose with the player? Is it accommodating? Is all these things? What is it? Is it arms on hips? Is it a picture like Max shared last week, where the 3 officials are standing in a group and obviously get along with each other? I'll tell you what mine is. The one that I absolutely think is the best image of a basketball referee is one of them kneeling down and tying the shoe of an 8-year-old kid in a community league basketball game. That to me sums up everything that is great about being a basketball referee. It might not be the same for everybody else, but I just think that's awesome. You're committed, you put in the time, you have a caring heart, and a good heart is a good start. And I think when we achieve what we perceive as success, because we all get to make our own judgments on what success is, I think keeping in mind some of those fundamental shifts in thinking or foundational sort of, positive vibes, that's something that can be, again, so impactful. And then maybe we'll step on the court with intention. Maybe we'll study with intention. Maybe we'll examine ourselves with intention in a way that's going to affect positive change. And at the end of the day, I think that's something that keeps us going, and know that it's all worth it. And the relationships you're going to build with people are totally worth it, and are going to be lifelong. And that's the awesome thing about what we're doing. But all right, that's all I got. So thank you, everybody. And there's my email address. I see, I don't know if Hutch has got another question, but or if that hand's up from before, but I'll let you take it over, Dan, and I'll Maybe stop sharing my screen there.
Well, Perry, thank you. Thank you very much for taking the time to chat with everyone. We really appreciate you doing this to really help us out and look at stuff like feedback. And, you know, that's such an important part of the game that, you know, I find it gets highly overlooked sometimes, that you jump onto a floor, you referee a game, and you might have someone there that you didn't even know was there to watch and might offer feedback. And, you know, most oftentimes than not, it's, you know, I got to get my shoes and go, or I got to do this, or I got to do that. And it's just such an important part of the game. And I'm really happy that you highlighted that part of it. But well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate you taking the time. If anyone has questions, I had one come through the chat. So the question that was posed through the chat was, what advice would you give to an up-and-coming official with lots of potential as it pertains to feedback and different things like that?
Yeah, well, you know, obviously I addressed the attitude part already, but I'm going to focus on the presence, as in presence in being there, presence in a room. And one of the things that I think surrounding yourself, you know, maybe we've heard the term mentors before. Of course, mentorship's always important. But mentorship doesn't always mean looking for somebody else. You might have a really good mentor in the mirror, meaning you could mentor somebody else, but focusing on officials, identify people that you look up to. And I would ask them for the, you know, if you can participate in a certain way. Maybe there's a person you know who lives in your area. Maybe they're working the university game. Say, hey, can I come in and sit in on your pregame? And, you know, I've had that happen, and I'm always totally for it. I mean, you know, different people might have different opinions on that. I think that's a great way, because you start to see the real interactions with people. You know, one of the things that I noticed, and again, we've come a long way, and this is not going to, this is not meant to badger people that have been doing it a long time, but we have come a long way in being able to openly accept criticism. And I'm going to talk about feedback, honest feedback from each other. And I remember when I first refereed university basketball, but, you know, even as a young official, you might identify in yourself, you might go, you know what, I think there's a better way to do this. And I remember, if you remember, sometimes back in the day, we used to have where we'd stand at one end for a timeout, and there'd be two of us together, and the other one would stand on the blocks at the other end, was sort of the mechanic. You might alternate who the two and who the one were, but that was sort of what was going on. And I remember, you know, I was refereeing with a couple of experienced officials, of course, because I was terrible. And I remember the game was so fast, and the ball went out of bounds. It was like, the ball was out of bounds. It was like, tweet, you know, but they would complain about each other. You see that call so-and-so just made? What the heck? Totally coming out of their area. Unbelievable. Boop. Next time out, I'm standing at the other end with the other guy. Unbelievable. We got to work with this guy tonight. Do you even get it? Like, da, 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 da. And I was thinking to myself, I feel like there's a better way. Hey, young officials, you might have a better way. Be able to recognize that. But I would say put yourself in that scenario. Put yourself in a situation where you can learn more that might be outside of a Zoom call or just watching people referee. If you're going to go to a university game and watch the best work, fantastic. You should do that as much as you can. But why not get into the room and hear what they're talking about before and after the game? That's even better.
And that's a great point. I mean, myself, I've done that numerous times at different levels of basketball to just go in and get that mental perspective of officials. And it almost talks about what Max talked about last week of, you know, before, during, and after the game, and kind of what they talk about. And it's different in each section of the game, because what you talk about before the game is going to change once you get through 2 quarters of that game, right? And what you talk about at halftime, you know, that's going to change after, because now you have the end of the game and you have all those different things that are coming up, you know, that are going to happen in games. And you're going to be able to talk about those. And you might sit there and say to yourself after the game, you know, I knew that, but it still gives you that piece to talk about, right? And it just shows you the preparedness you have to have on the floor. But if anyone else has questions, I don't have anything in the chat. If you want to unmute yourself and ask away, feel free to go. If not, you make it an early night, Perry. I think Max took all the questions last week.
Yeah, they say never follow a better comedian. So I was like, man, Max nailed that performance. What am I going to do next week now?
Max, sorry, Dan or Perry, maybe I'll try something. So Perry's presentation was about building your brand. Is there someone that's on the call that can think about how they've represented themselves tonight and how they might do something different for the next seminar next Wednesday? Is there somebody on the call that might have an idea of things that I've looked at, that maybe SIP has looked at, that some of the other assigners on the call have looked at as this call has been going on, that you might want to do differently the next time?
That's one of those hard questions, right? It's meant to be rhetorical, but not really.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I think at the end of the day, you know, when I said it's all worth it, I think it's all worth it. And if you can't say that it is, I mean, I know we go through periods of time where sometimes we may not feel it is. You know, we might waffle. You know, I mean, you know, I said I'm an optimistic guy, but sometimes, you know, you have tough days, and we all do. And this dynamic of doing something that people don't appreciate you, I mean, that to me is tough, right? If you honestly don't feel like what you're doing is being appreciated. But I honestly do think that the strength in being able to twist that a bit, like I said, perspective wise, and maybe say, okay, you know what might be the answer for me might require a different solution for somebody else. I get that. And so, you know, that's a very real thing, but that shouldn't, you know, paralyze us from putting ourselves out there. You know, I talked about outward commitment, you know, or outward displays, inner commitment. You know, if so-and-so does something and they're like, well, you know, empathy is a good word. Mike's on this call, he'll appreciate this. Empathy is a fantastic word. You know, and the thought I have sometimes is when people say something, maybe in a feedback scenario, or they share their thoughts about a performance you had or a call or whatever, you know, and then you say, oh yeah, well, I've heard that before. Well, it should bother you that you've heard that before, like, right, that you haven't sort of been able to fix it yet. I mean, if it's within the same weekend, I get it. But if you've heard that for years and years and years from different people, like, deal with it. But the other side of that is, you know, when you think about it, you know, putting that out there, having those solutions, you know, it's so worth it. There's an opportunity there for you to grow. And that to me is one of the best things about being a basketball official. Second to the relationships you're going to build with people. And, you know, I found that time and time again. And, you know, you might say to yourself, oh, well, you know, they're saying I'm not committed because they didn't see me show it in this way. Okay, well, you can say that. Or you can say, you know what, I care about what I'm doing. So maybe your solution is to put yourself out there a little bit more, because maybe you're a little bit more shy or closed or aloof as a person. So look at that, look in the mirror and see if there's a way that you can adjust how you're perceived by what you're putting out there. So I think Terrence had his hand up. Is that what I see?
Yeah, Terrence, go ahead, buddy.
Thanks, Tim. Yes, in response to Mike's question, it's a thought I had earlier in the show. I noticed how the referees are all clean shaven, and I thought, you know what, I should be clean shaven for this. But also I'd like to get a haircut, because maybe one of these days the shops will open. But I'll be shaved next one. Thanks.
I'm going to tell you a funny story. I shaved for this. I figured if I was the presenter, I should. You know, I can't. My wife prefers if I don't. So I picked you guys and gals over my wife, which I'm not sure is the right call, but, you know, you got to do what you got to do.
Tough call.
Question just came in through the chat for you, Perry, from Rash. Do you think staying true to your beliefs and nature is more important than molding your behavior to appease our signers or referee coaches, meaning behavior versus your presence on the court? Good question.
Yeah, that's you know what? I'm reminded of another Dr. Seuss quote. It's going to sound like all I read is children's books, but you know, sometimes the questions are complicated and the answer is simple. Okay, so the short of it is, when you talk about beliefs, to me, that's very fundamental core stuff. Okay, and so what I'm going to suggest is my belief that I should be with a good attitude, accepting of any feedback that is given to me, really trumps a lot of that other stuff. How somebody delivers it to me, short of being outright abusive or something like that, which I personally have never experienced. I understand that there's circumstances where, things can be like that. It shouldn't be, but what I've seen more often is when somebody holds on to a belief because they think they're right. And then they want to have this little exchange until the other person realizes they're right. Well, you can believe you're right. Just believe it in your own head, and frankly, as long as the voices in your head follow orders, you're going to do just fine. But it's that sort of dynamic of, they're wrong. That is unhealthy. And it's going to fight off success with a stick, like I said earlier. And so I get it. To me, beliefs is something that's more fundamental to that. If I had a religious belief that there was something, okay, that to me is totally separate from that, or something that was like that. Belief in, I was in the right spot. I thought I made the right call. I thought I dealt with that coach in the right way. They're a jerk. What else was I supposed to do? All of those things, again, they take you on a divergent path to success. So I consider ways to accept it. At the end of the day, you're going to have to be the one that enacts it or doesn't enact it into your game, right? And you might get some feedback, and I'll go back to what I said earlier. You got feedback that people have told you 5 times. If 5 different people have told you something 5 times, you're wasting everybody's time, including your own. And I don't mean that means you shouldn't referee. I'm just saying, why wouldn't you want to overcome that? And if you're not somebody that wants to overcome that, then maybe you're not the one we're looking for. That's the hard truth. But you know what? You keep getting games because we need 6 and we've only got 5. So you're in, but you're on the outside, if you know what I'm saying. Does that make sense?
No, it's a great answer. That's a great answer. Thanks for the question, Arash. Anyone else have questions? If you do, you can just use your hand up button and I can chime you in. Okay.
I think Safe's got his hand up.
Yes, I do. Thanks, Perry. Just wanted to ask if you had any tips or suggestions for those of us that are in situations where we're the ones providing feedback. Whether we're talking about a situation where we're part of the crew, or let's say we happen to be an observer watching the game and providing some feedback afterwards. Do you have any things for us to think about from that perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to say you've split it into 2 very important categories. Feedback within the crew, meaning when you're a crew member, is different than as an evaluator. The way in which you deliver it, I think, obviously when I talk about things like with respect and some of those other components I talked about is important anyway. But when you're also on the floor, the tendency can be for people to, just bring up something when somebody kicked a call. Hey, I'm having a rough night tonight, aren't you? Or what were you looking at on that one? Or those kinds of things, which are not going to improve the crew dynamic. I found more often than not, when I'm on a crew, if you have somebody that's struggling or, seems to not be as focused in an evening, or perhaps they're a younger official and they're just learning their way, giving them a job to focus on is a really helpful way to get them aligned with sort of what the goals are for the crew in the game, and in a positive way. And I think that's one technique. We talk about giving feedback as an evaluator in a game. You sort of have inherent permission, right? There's an expectation that you're going to have something to offer. In fact, it would be more awkward if you spent all your time there over a couple hours at a game and then you walked in the room and say, yeah, I don't have anything for you guys. Say, thanks, good job. Again, I'm going to get back to that. My willingness to share honest feedback with you. It probably says more like, I don't value you that much in a lot of ways. And it might be because I've seen you 3 times this week, but let's put that aside for a second. So as somebody that's offering information, I want it to be vital. I want it to be more than superficial. I want it to be, expressed in a way that makes sense. I know sometimes, I think we've all done it to a level, but we try to use maybe analogies or different kind of, and sometimes we just get to the level of allegory when we're trying to frame a question. And then it's like a measurement of their intelligence or focus when they don't know what the heck we're asking them, right? So let's be direct with our questions, right? Let's frame them in a way that reflects intellect and things like that. But sometimes, especially with younger officials, the way we ask the question is important. And if you don't get the answer you're looking for, again, as an evaluator, look in the mirror maybe and understand that the way you put it out there is important. The other thing I'm going to say is, and it's going to sound hypocritical, I'll use my word again, because I'm doing a whole lot of talking, but I have to do this to myself all the time, as you can tell, is to find moments to shut up and listen. Mike, put that big smile away. But, I think we all suffer from that maybe a little bit, some more than most. Okay, you're up.
Thanks, Perry. I had two questions in your chat, but it was just one of them was about for female officials, because we seem to always constantly, they're battling more than just a male official in the game, because they have to be better than some others. That seems to be a given in some situations. So what's a real good few words of encouragement for officials, especially new officials who have some, in my view, when I watch them and I assign them, they got a lot of upside, but they're struggling with their confidence maybe, or stuff like that, and they could get to the next level. And I think you touched on it earlier. The other one is a general question about what's maybe the greatest negative that an official has to fight when they're trying to move to that next level, as far as their attitude towards how they approach the game of officiating.
Okay, so let's talk on the first question. So I'm going to say this, and I hope everybody takes this in the right way. We have made a lot of inroads, but there's a long way to go when it talks about promoting women in sport and as officiating, and you're seeing a real refocus. I find it interesting that in spite of all of those efforts and a long way to go, that as a man, I'm going to have the best idea and opinion on how a young woman should behave or answer or take something that's given to her. So I'm going to say that it is really vital that female officials have female role models and mentors accessible to them, that can I'll say more honestly, maybe with more empathy, share their experience. However, I'm going to say this, and I've used this line more with younger officials, but it applies all across the board, is that giving them a sense that they belong is a really good start. If we look back at that Google review and I said she is a real asset, can you imagine if you looked at a young official who'd been there 2 weeks and you said, man, I'm really impressed with you. You just are a real asset. It is great to have you around. What else would you possibly have to say that was better than that to that person in that moment, right? And I think that there's so much opportunity for that. And when we can provide those kinds of opportunities, that you are valued, it's great that you're here. See you tomorrow. Man, I don't think we need to get much more complex than that in a lot of ways, even though we try to. It's good seeing you again, Bill, by the way.
Take care. Yeah. I was going to ask you about your lip reading.
Yes. Yeah. And then, sorry, you had another part to that question. What was the second part of the question?
Well, perhaps it's a big negative. What's perhaps the greatest detriment to an attitude to an official who's a real good up and comer, but they may have to change their way of looking at the world for a mentor or an evaluator, that type of thing, because it's a situation where we get some young up and comers who have got a lot of upside, but they just have to change maybe their mindset about how they're receiving their positive feedback, how quickly they're progressing to that next level. After a year or so of and maybe less than 100 ball games, you're not headed for the panel or USport or stuff like that. You gotta work on your game.
Yeah, it's this dynamic
that type of thing.
Yeah, it's that whole dynamic. It sort of doesn't seem congruent, right? I talked about it earlier. You got to express desire. So you want, I'm going to borrow your word that you didn't say, but you were thinking it, that young whippersnapper that's, a little big for their britches. But you want that on a level, right? You need confidence. You need all these kinds of things. And I liken it unto somebody that was like the honor student in high school. You know, to get into university, you're one of the top kids in your class, right? You achieved, you got the grades. Let's say you were whatever, you know, whatever those tough programs are to get into right out of high school. Let's say you're going into pharmacy, the elite of the elite. You walk in that room and everybody that's sitting in that room was the best in their high school class. Now, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
And so there is that dynamic of it. And so you do have to learn and get out of your own way in some respects, but it's a balance. I'm gonna talk about Tim Heenan again. It seems like Tim Heenan night here, but you know, one of the things he said to me, because I was refereeing college basketball at about my early 20s. And so I knew a lot of the players personally. It's one of the things that helped me because I was a college age person. And so I had rapport with players automatically, even when you wouldn't at coaches. Like a 22-year-old who's a rookie referee is not going to have it with coaches, right? But the players all liked me and knew me. And so I could sort of, and they would go to their coach, right? It was a kind of a way I could have an in. But, you know, when you have that dynamic, you know, I remember personality-wise, maybe it comes across today, maybe not. In the room, if you know me as a friend, you know, I like to joke around. I can be, you know, sometimes I have to pull myself back a little bit, you know, just, you know, try to be more serious. On the court, I sort of get the opposite. I had to learn that, right? People are like, hey, man, you just look like you're pissed off all the time. And so what it was is I just looked a little too loose. I remember Tim saying to me, nobody likes this, you know, he said, smart ass young kid. You won't lose that label for a while. You won't lose that label, right? And so I had to learn, like, you know, and again, with middling results here or there, that sometimes, you know, it's important to zip it, accept it. But then when you make a mistake, recognize it and improve that mistake. You know, quick story. I remember one situation, we had a playing coach. It was a junior college here in Alberta. Bible school was playing in a tournament. So playing coach, you don't get playing coaches very much. And I remember, you know, points of emphasis, you know, hand check foul. I want to say the fouls were 5-1, you know, pretty early with a bunch of hand checks. And I remember him complaining about the 5th foul. And I looked at him, I said, listen, we've called 5 of those in a row. You know, you guys need to adjust. And he tapped me on the shoulder and he goes, well, none of those are fouls. So maybe you need to adjust. Right? It was a golden comeback.
Yeah.
And people were like, did you tee him up? I was like, heck no. That was the best comeback I ever heard. I laughed because he could have been right. He could have been right. And so what did I do? I said, okay, you know, you got to assess. You got to be willing to accept and assess. Not everybody's wrong when they give you information. You know, coaches get to be right sometimes too. You know, that's a fact. Yeah.
Excellent. Last call for questions. All right. Mr. Thompson, before you take off, had mentioned there's going to be actually a CBOC seminar on May the 30th on delivering feedback. So you can mark that in on your calendars. That's going to be coming up. As well, Georgia asked me to mention tonight the Women in Basketball initiative that's going on in March as well. Just that those activities are starting as of March the 8th and will continue throughout the month. The specific week of the 22nd to the 28th, it has been designated as Women in Officiating Week. There'll be lots of activities going on there. So Georgia has just asked that if you are interested in any information on that at all, please reach out to her. She'll be more than happy to get you information on that, as well as information for tickets, or if you're interested in purchasing stuff for those sessions. Perry, thank you so much for taking time tonight. We've appreciated having you. Please come back and visit Ontario anytime that you want, but there's lots of sessions that are going to be left coming up. But thank you so much. I'm just reading the comments in the chat, and there's been quite a bit of great feedback come through there. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge.
You bet. Thanks for having me, guys. It's a great thing you're doing here, Dan. Great thing you're doing here, guys. Take advantage of it.
So hopefully we'll see everyone next week. We're going from coast to coast. We go to Nova Scotia next week. We're going to have Brent Stothart on as our speaker. Should have some interesting stories. Brent was my mentor growing up, so that might be one you want to tune in for. But we'll be back at 7:30 again. But again, thank you everyone for joining tonight. If you have members that weren't on the call tonight, this recording will be made available to them as well through the link that Peter McDonald has created. So Pete, again, thank you so much for all the help you're doing with this through Table, with the Vimeo link that he's created with everything that's going to go on there from the channel. So thank you everyone for joining. Have a great evening. Perry, thank you again so much. Appreciate it, man.
All right, take care, everybody. It's good seeing you.
Thank you, Kerry.
You bet.